Right now we're facing a approximately $7 to $8 billion shortfall. State government is the glue of civil society. It funds everything from public education from K to 12 to great college and university system we have in the state of Ohio, state parks, prisons, human and social services, food banks. We're presuming that you're interested in this because you care about Ohio and want you to be as well informed as possible and help us create a search for more revenue in order to meet the needs that we think we have in the state of Ohio.
The choices that have been made are penny wise and pound foolish. We are disinvesting in human capital, and at a time when we see more people needing these services, and I'm talking about basic needs services for food, for shelter, for utilities, for housing assistance, we're seeing across the board disinvestment both at the state and the federal level. We are not able to hold back the growing demand of more people needing more food more frequently. And in fact, today in the state of Ohio, 1 in 6 Ohioans are turning to a food pantry in order to feed themselves and their families. Our message to lawmakers is that now's the time to ensure that these basic services are met, or Ohio will never recover from the Great Recession.
Ohio is facing this financial crisis not just because of the national economy, but because of our own conscious policy. The State General Assembly 5 years ago approved major reduction in taxes, and it resulted in what the Ohio Department of Taxation has told us is a $2 billion reduction in state revenue every year, contributing a huge amount to the financial crisis that we face. The reason we approved these tax cuts was to boost the Ohio economy. Unfortunately, this has not happened. Our jobs continue to lag beyond those of the country as a whole. We need to reverse tax cuts for the wealthy who didn't need them, who have seen big increases in income over the past decade or more. And we need to revisit the business tax changes to generate more tax revenue there as well. There's another area we could also look at to generate more tax revenue. The state itself identifies $7 billion a year in exemptions and credits and deductions that are not paid in taxes. One of them is that if you hire a lobbyist, you don't have to pay any sales tax. Another is that payday lenders and mortgage brokers don't have to pay the same rate that banks do. There are any number of these kinds of loopholes which ought to be looked at. They aren't looked at from one year to the next, and they ought to be just as state spending is every 2 years in the budget.
In the community that I organize in, East Cleveland, I also live there too. We've seen like the result of a crashed economy. We have over 20% of the housing stock within East Cleveland is abandoned or vacant. Since 2005, we've seen 2 libraries gone out of East Cleveland. I'm afraid to see that this is going to get worse, especially in stress times like this. We're depending on vouchers for child care for the young people, Medicaid, the type of public services that the community depends on. I'm really concerned how these tax cuts might hurt communities like East Cleveland.
One of the things that really concerns me about the state budget is that funding for federally qualified healthcare centers like Neon Health Clinic might be cut. If that happens, then funding for programs like teenage pregnancy prevention and teenage education will be cut as well, and that's something we can't afford in our community.
We would like to see an education budget that really looks at funding kids in the best possible way it can, and we want a balanced approach to that funding. Because if we do cut education just on a across the board 15 to 20% level, what happens is we'll see that teachers are going to be laid off. And as teachers are laid off or not replaced when they retire, we'll see our class sizes go up. When you have class sizes of 30 and 40 students, that's a different environment for learning, particularly if that building is new and it's only designed for 25 students. You're crowding kids into the classroom, and it's not making for the best academic environment possible. The state has abrogated its tax burden and shifted that burden down to the local level. And so some way they have to make up those revenues, and they make them up through property taxes.
I'm concerned about school funding cuts because we have already failed to pass 2 levies at our school and have already cut 13 teachers for next year.
One of my concerns is with funding being cut from the state to the local school districts will put even a heavier burden on our taxpayers.
I'm an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer. It's important for me to be engaged in the community in that way. I work as a community organizer for a really great nonprofit. I don't make a lot of money because of that position, so I can't afford a car, and I need to rely on alternative means of travel, which is bicycling and public transit. I use transit to commute. I use it to get to places that are especially far away, that a simple bike ride won't suffice. Everyday locomotion, getting to work, doing my errands, and so I rely on public transit, and it's valuable to me to live near good connections. And if I don't have them, then it's going to affect my decisions on where I live. And if my city doesn't have it, my state doesn't have it, I'll go somewhere else that does.
One Ohio Now was formed by a broad growing group of organizations that care about our state, really looking at how to address the upcoming budget crisis. The national recession has impacted Ohio greatly. Families are struggling through no fault of their own. And just at a time when their needs are rising, the resources to meet those needs is declining. So One Ohio Now has come together to see how we can maintain adequate funding for the services that assist families and communities, mostly looking at a balanced approach, including revenues, instead of relying solely on cuts. We really need to go to legislators and talk to them about what the impacts are for these cuts, and that these are unacceptable, that we need to discuss revenues so that we can meet the needs of Ohioans today and position ourselves for economic prosperity when it returns.
We need you. We need you to help us and join with others to really fight for a budget that makes sense, that is meets the needs of its citizenry, that is built on a progressive basis, where those who are able to afford paying part of their incomes and their wealth back into the system to provide for the common good are able to do that. And so that's why this revenue campaign is really important. That's why we're going to need as many bodies out there as possible. That's why this is the start, it seems to me, of rebuilding a progressive movement in the state of Ohio. And your assistance is really, really important. So thank you very much for the work you've done in the past, and I'm going to make some presumptions here and assume you're going to help us out in the future.